Genesis chapter 45 tonight, continuing the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. After that, Lord willing, we're going to switch over to the book of Daniel. And I'm pretty sure Will's going to do what? Help? Yeah, do some teaching in the book of Daniel for us. So he did a really good job. Everybody keeps telling me he did a great job back in the Sunday morning adult classroom that they have back in the fellowship room. They're studying the book of Revelation right now. And so before they started Revelation, they did Daniel. And did you do all the book of Daniel? Yeah. Boy. So he's well versed in it, and he's just recently taught it. And so he's going to do the second part, hopefully, of the book of Daniel whenever we get there. Looking forward to that, though. A lot of good prophecy in the book of Daniel. And if you want to know how it relates to the book of Revelation, you have to go back at Sunday morning to their class and talk about it back there. Genesis chapter 45, that's where we're going to start tonight. And the thing about it, question, of course, has to do with part of the sentiment that we're going to study here within the chapter itself. I always say this, one of the things that I don't fully appreciate when I often read these Bible stories is the reality and the humanity of the things that are going on. I think a lot of times it's just real easy to read these stories and, just kind of take them on face value and don't really think about them that deeply. But tonight, hopefully we'll do a good job of justifying that and look a little bit deeper. But that's really what question number one has to do with. And the question is this: have you ever tried to tell somebody something while you're in an extremely emotional state? Ever had that experience before? Yes? No? Is anybody awake?
Anytime there's death and to someone close, that's going to be hard to solve.
It is, isn't it? And generally, when you're in an extremely emotional state, especially if that's, somebody who's close to you, and you're calling your family to notify them or tell them about it, it usually doesn't go very well, does it? Sometimes, you can end up just being a blubbering mess, and people sometimes just have a real hard time, understanding what you're even trying to say because of the emotional state that you're in. And so tonight I want us to kind of think about that idea as Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. And of course, we'll talk about how that probably affected some of the things that we read about in the first part of the chapter. But, those experiencing emotions, God gave us emotions for a reason. I don't think it's ever a healthy thing to try to hide those emotions or suppress them or, pretend like they don't exist. I think when you read about Jesus was a very emotional individual. Paul was another one of those people I think that really stands out. But you go throughout the Bible and you'll read about instances like this, but I think Joseph was a pretty emotional individual, don't you? Just the way that we read about him, the way he interacts, and some of his reactions to things that happened within his life. But I was thinking about particularly, have you ever heard a recorded 911 call? Maybe you listened to a podcast, or maybe you watched a television show with something like that. And if this person, has discovered one of their loved ones who's deceased and they make that call, a lot of times the operator, can't even really understand what's going on because of all the emotions that person is going through. So it's a pretty common human experience. And I think Joseph has one of those experiences when he begins revealing himself to his brothers. So let's start here in chapter 1. Question number 2 on your handout. Why did Joseph finally make himself known to his brothers? Yeah, you read right there in verse 1, New King James Version said he could not restrain himself. I think King James Version says refrain himself, but the same idea, he just couldn't stand it any longer. You might say he couldn't hold it in anymore. He couldn't keep his composure any longer. And all those emotions and all those feelings. Now think about this. He'd been holding all this in for a long time. You know, the first time that his brothers came and visited, he didn't reveal himself. And they go back and, you know, he has all that time to think about it. They come back again, and there's some things that happen in that process. But remember, as we ended chapter 44, he's basically said that he's going to, Joseph has pretended, you know, that he doesn't know these guys, that he's going to take Benjamin as a slave. And remember the speech that Judah makes. Remember, Judah stands up for Benjamin and he says, you know, if you will, let me stand in his place. He talks about his father, talked about the broken heart of his father, you know, when he lost Joseph and what this would do to him. And I think all that just comes flooding upon Joseph at one time. And, you know, he can't hold back any longer. And so imagine all those emotions and those feelings that Joseph has experienced just pouring out all at once. And I think that kind of gives a little bit deeper picture to some of the things we're going to read about that happens here. So question number 3 is this: how is Joseph's extremely emotional state seen in his actions? The Bible tells us he couldn't hold it anymore, but what actions reveal that? Yeah, and you know, was this just like the silent tear that came down Joseph's face? How would you describe it? Yeah, and you know, literally it says in the Hebrew he was wailing. It wasn't just the fact that tears were coming down his face, but he was just literally sobbing. And have you ever talked to a person or tried to talk to a person in that kind of state? I mean, it's pretty difficult to do, isn't it? But Joseph here, in fact, it says that he sobbed so violently or so loudly that the Egyptians who had been sent to their servant quarters, that they heard him. And it wasn't like, you know, sometimes you sit at night at home and your wife says, "Did you hear that?" What was that sound? It wasn't like it was just this faint noise somewhere off in the distance. It was the unmistakable sound of sobbing and weeping. And so they immediately recognized it as such, and it was so loud and so violent that they couldn't help but hear that Joseph, you know, pouring out these emotions. So the first thing that he says is what? Or maybe I should even say try to say. I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say, right? Well, what's the first words out of his mouth? Let's do it that way.
He identified himself and then questioned if his father is still alive or not.
Yeah. The first thing that he says is, "I am Joseph," and then that's immediately followed up by, "Is my father still alive?" So again, now think about this. How do you think Joseph spoke those words? I mean, do you think he spoke them like in the calm and clear demeanor that I'm speaking to you? No, he's violently sobbing, right? The Bible says. And again, if you've ever talked to somebody who's in that emotional state, the words just kind of, you know, they kind of come in and out. And so I don't know if you know, they immediately understand everything that he says, but Joseph did speak those words, but again, he spoke them in a very emotional state. So think about if they did fully understand what he said. First of all, "I am Joseph." I mean, what do you think their initial reaction would be?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you would just be utterly shocked, wouldn't you? This was a guy who, at least in their storytelling, what did they say had happened to him?
They tore apart.
Yeah. When they stood before Joseph, and again, I think this is probably what they thought in their minds, they said, "One of us is not." So they had just literally thought he'd probably been sold into slavery and he probably got killed somewhere along the line.
It really doesn't say, but he obviously is speaking Hebrew.
Yeah.
And up to this point, he'd always spoken Egyptian and had to have it interpreted.
Right.
But then, here he switched to Hebrew.
Yeah. And that probably had to be pretty shocking to him too, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, because
they were talking about themselves. They didn't know he could understand Hebrew.
yeah, the first time they come to him, they just talk freely among themselves because he's speaking to him through an interpreter, right? And up to this point, again, like you said, I think it's pretty obvious he's been speaking to him in an interpreter, through an interpreter. But when he sends everybody out of the room and it's just them, you know, in that family moment, he speaks in Hebrew to them, and he says, "I'm Joseph." I mean, I can't imagine the amount of feelings or maybe just numbness that was going through their minds at this particular point. You know, again, I pointed out, imagine thinking, now I think that's what they fully thought. He was dead at this point. But imagine thinking that someone that you knew was dead, and let's just make it even more closer to the story here. One of your close family members, maybe one of your siblings, thinking they were dead. 22 years have passed. One day you walk in and this person stands up and says, "Hey, I'm your brother, your sister, and I'm the president of the United States." I mean, what would you think? It'd be pretty shocking, wouldn't it? Be a lot to think about, a lot to swallow. And that's obvious in their reaction. They were utterly speechless, and apparently they even backed up a little bit because Joseph has to tell them a little bit later, come over here, you know, come close to me or come here. But if you think about the reality of the situation too, Joseph just all of a sudden his emotions explode. I mean, this guy they're thinking about, you know, this is the second in command of Egypt here. All of a sudden he's just this blubbering man. You know, they'd probably be thinking, what in the world is going on here? You know, what is all this stuff? But I don't know how much of it actually sank in when he said those things, but we know that they didn't reply, at least immediately at first. So question number 5 here, Joseph tries to get them to say something, and so he begins telling them not to be angry with himself. And according to Joseph here, question 5 on your handout, why does he tell his brothers not to be angry with themselves? Did they have a hard time? Do you think they had a hard time dealing with what they had done to Joseph?
Sure.
Yeah.
It was on their mind.
It was, wasn't it? I mean, that's pretty obvious as you read the story. Wasn't like they'd forgotten all about it. You know, never brought it up again, never thought about it. I think it was constantly on their minds, don't you?
They even mentioned that whenever they wanted to keep, Benjamin, that, this is for the sins we've committed, basically.
Yeah.
So they were quite aware of it.
Yeah. And I think later on, it's like stuff you do sometimes. Later on, you have regrets. And probably in their minds, there wasn't really anything you could do. I mean, what could you do about it? But I think they had a hard time, just dealing with the thought of what they had done with Joseph. But why does he tell them not to be angry?
Because it was all for a purpose. God sent him ahead to preserve life.
Yeah. And I think that's a good lesson for us, because sometimes we do things that are wrong and we have trouble living with that, don't we? Even after you've dealt with it properly. I think a lot of times you just have problems letting go of those things that you've done that are wrong. That's just, I think, a natural human reaction and tendency. I think Satan can use it against us and does a lot of times. But that he told them, don't dwell on what you did wrong. We know you committed sin. We know you're guilty. But don't dwell on that particular thought or idea, because God had done something amazing. And that was really Joseph's focus. It wasn't all the things, the cruel and the wicked and the evil things that his brothers had done to him in the past. It was the amazing thing that God had done with this situation. And I want to spend just a little bit of time here because, I always say when we go through these lessons, there's good modern day application for us. But I think the lesson that I get out of this chapter and out of this story here tonight is the idea that God is in control at all times, and that God can always make good things happen, no matter what. And that's hard to see sometimes in life. I mean, a lot of times when you get in those down places and those dark places in life, you think, well, what in the world good could ever come, from this situation? But if you hold your finger here just a moment, turn over to Genesis chapter 50 real quickly. This is after Jacob dies here. We're going to fast forward it just a little bit, because this is the point that Joseph is making here back in this chapter. Hopefully when we get to chapter 50, I won't have to spend very much time here, if any, going over it. But he tells his brothers there in verse 20, he says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about it as it is this day, to save many people alive." When Joseph's brothers did the things that they did to him, what was their intent?
Get rid of him.
Yeah, it was to bring harm, wasn't it? It was to inflict pain. It was to cause destruction. They meant the things that they did to Joseph as being evil and inflicting pain and suffering, but God used it for something good, didn't he? And the good that he used it was he got Joseph down into Egypt and made him second in command, and revealed to him that there was going to be a famine so that he could save a lot of people's lives. And you read that verse again, Genesis 50 and verse 20, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Can you think of a New Testament passage that's pretty similar to that?
Romans 8:28 is pretty close.
Yeah, pretty close, isn't it? Because Paul writes there, he said, "All things work together for good to those that love the Lord and those that are called according to his purpose." Right? And this is a living illustration of that principle. I know a lot of times people often get offended, and I've even had some really take offense at the idea that God can make something good happen where people intended it to be something bad. But isn't that what the Bible says? I mean, isn't Joseph a living illustration of that? I mean, you think of the life of Jesus. Jesus came to this earth, lived a perfect life. People nailed him to a cross and killed him. Did they mean that for an evil and a wicked purpose? Yeah. Did God do something good with it? God did something amazing with it. Something that no human mind or plan could have ever fathomed. And so the reason this principle is so important, and this is something that Danny talks about a lot, but it means God is in control at all times, doesn't it? Even when people are doing mean and bad and wicked things in the world, God is still in control. Okay? Was he in control when Joseph was sold into slavery? Was he in control when Potiphar's wife accused him and he was put into prison? Was he in control when his son was hanging on the cross? Yeah. Even though people do wicked and mean and evil things, God's still in control. And God can accomplish good out of any situation. Here's what I do want to emphasize though. God did not do what his brothers did to Joseph, right? God did not make them evil and wicked. God just used what they did to bring about a good thing. And it's the same way with Jesus. God used what those evil people, what they intended to be something painful and wicked and evil, he used it to accomplish something good. And that's the wisdom, that's the depths and the riches of the wisdom and the knowledge of God. That's what Paul talks about in Romans 11:33, right? God can use the things that we do to bring about something good, whether it's good, we do good, or whether we do bad. But it's the story of the Bible. God uses these people to accomplish his purpose. But to me, that's always a comforting thing because it means that God is in control. And even in the darkest days of our lives, God is still in control. And so that's what Joseph's talking about here. Joseph said God was in control. He had a plan to bring me to Egypt so that I could preserve my family, Jacob and his family. Why was it so important to preserve Jacob and his family?
Christ's lineage.
The lineage of Christ. If Jacob and his family dies, Jesus doesn't come. Okay, so this is kind of the ironic statement that Joseph makes, and I don't know if he fully comprehends it, but he says to save much people alive. I mean, we're literally alive spiritually today because of Joseph, aren't we? Because God put him down into Egypt and he preserved Jacob's seed, and through Israel, Jesus was born and he died upon the cross. But that was the great plan of God. It was big. It was bigger than just one man. It was bigger than just one family. It was bigger than just one nation. I mean, it was about the plan about the entire salvation of all mankind throughout the history, from Adam to the end. But it's a good reminder. But without realizing it, brothers thought they were doing something evil and wicked. They were actually doing something good for God's plan, weren't they? Again, that's the amazing plan, or amazing wisdom and knowledge of God. All right, well, I preached about that long enough. Let's go to question number 6 here. How long had the famine been upon the land at this time?
2 years.
We're okay. We're 2 years into the great famine. How many years is it supposed to last? 7. That means there's how many years left? 5. This is a pretty good timeline where you can kind of get pretty close, I think, to figuring out how old Joseph is at this point. So if you remember, how old was Joseph whenever he was tending his father's sheep?
17. wasn't it?
17. Yeah. And how old was he whenever he was brought out of prison to interpret Pharaoh's dream? That was a little harder.
About 21.
No? A little older than that. A little older. You're getting warmer. He was 30 years old, the Bible says. He was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh. And when he stood before Pharaoh, he said there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and there's going to be 7 years of famine. So if you add the 7 years of plenty to the 30, that's 37. You add the 2 years of famine, that's 39. So he's probably around 40 years old at this point in his life as he's standing, or as he's revealing himself to his brothers. Gives you kind of a timeline, doesn't give you all the specifics, but it gives you an idea about, again, some of the years and how much time has passed between all these events. So question number 7 here, how did seeing the things that happened to him, that is Joseph, as God's plan, help him? Did it help him?
Yes.
Yeah. So how did it help him?
Well, it helped him to see the prosperity of the earth.
Okay.
It probably helped him not have resentment against his brothers.
Yeah. Was he angry at his brothers? Didn't have any kind of resentment toward them. Didn't want revenge. Didn't want to say, well, you're going to get what you deserve now, right? The fact that he could see God's hand in all this helped him not to be angry with his brothers, did it? And that's one of those, I think, one of those great lessons for us. We got to try to see God's hand in even the bad things that happen in life. I mean, you think about Paul in prison. I often say, do you think that's where Paul wanted to be if he had his choice? No, but that's where God needed him, right? So God allowed him to go there so that he could reach a group of people that probably wouldn't have been reached otherwise with the gospel of Christ. But that's hard to see in the downs of life, isn't it? It's hard to see the positive. But if we can always have that mindset, hey, I know there's some reason and there's some good that can come out of this. And we may not see it this side of eternity. But I'll guarantee you, when we see God's plan on the other side of eternity, we're going to say, that's what all that was about, right? God has a plan, but it's not always easy to see. But if we can kind of keep that mindset, that will help us a lot. It'll help us from getting, to be too angry with people or, wanting vengeance upon them, things like that. Let's see here. Question number 8. What did Joseph tell his brothers to say to their father?
Come be with me and I will take care of you and your family and your flocks.
Yeah, Joseph showed care and concern for his entire family. And, again, you think about Joseph. Joseph was a pretty sharp guy. He already had a plan to take care of her, didn't he? He probably been thinking about this for a long time. But he had a plan, and he said, you need to go get Dad. You need to bring him down here to Egypt and tell him that God has made me Lord over all of Egypt. And if he'll come to Egypt, then, I'll give him a place to live, and you won't have to worry about him. Won't have to worry about food or anything anymore. Question number 9 here. What would be the consequences of not listening to Joseph? What did Joseph know that everybody else did?
There's still a famine going on.
The famine still coming.
Yeah, still 5 more years of this, guys. This is only year 2. Okay, we got 2 years behind our belts. We got 5 more years to go. What do you think 5 more years would have done to Jacob and his property?
Devastated.
Yeah, there wouldn't have been anything left, would there? And so Joseph knew that. His family didn't. But, I think what he's telling them, could they have made continual trips back and forth from Egypt to Canaan? Well, yeah, but if you got to do that for 5 years, that'd be pretty foolish, wouldn't it? It'd be a lot easier if they just moved down there and he could just take care of them right there. Then you wouldn't have to worry about hauling everything back and forth. You wouldn't have to worry about the dangers of the journey. Something happened to somebody. If you needed anything, Joseph was right there, had the resources to take care of it. But if they stayed there, Joseph said, if you guys stay there, you're going to lose everything. And so it was really a no-brainer. It wasn't much of a choice. If Joseph was going to take care of them anyway, why not just move closer? So he could really take care of them and oversee their prosperity firsthand. Question number 10 here. What else were the brothers supposed to tell their father to help him convince to come down to Egypt?
Supposed to tell them about what he had accomplished there in Egypt.
Yeah, they'd seen it firsthand, hadn't they? And so these were guys who could say, listen, we've seen it with our own eyes. Okay, we've seen the position that he's in. We've seen his prosperity. They've been in his house, right? They'd eaten there. They saw all the servants and all the possessions that he had. They knew firsthand that Joseph could do what he was saying he was going to do. And so basically he told them, you reassure Dad that I can do what I'm telling you I'm going to do for you. And I can provide for him. I can provide for you. I can provide for your families. He said for your children, for your grandchildren, and all your animals, all your possessions. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Jacob had a lot of those, didn't he? A lot of animals, a lot of possessions. But Joseph told him to tell him, don't worry, I can do it. Question number 11 here. How do Joseph and Benjamin interact with each other?
Hug and kiss one another. Hug and kiss one another.
Yeah, they showed great affection for one another, didn't they? That, to me, that kind of indicates, I don't know exactly how old Benjamin is at this point, or the age difference between Joseph and Benjamin, but it kind of indicates to me that they'd had some kind of relationship before. This wasn't like the first time they'd ever seen each other, or they'd ever done anything together. I think they had great affection for one another. It's like two people, long lost friends who are reunited. But Benjamin is his true brother. All these other are what we would call stepbrothers, right? They same father but different mother. Benjamin was his true brother, and so there was a relationship between them that wasn't present between all these other brothers that he had. But how does he interact with the rest of his brothers?
does the same.
Yeah, he embraces each one of them. Does he weeps as he embraces them? He kisses them, and then after he does that, the Bible says that they spent time together. They spent some time talking together. I mean, can you imagine trying to get caught up? Joseph, had to tell him all the backstory, everything that had happened, how he got to this position. He was married. He had 2 kids. Had to introduce him to his wife and to his sons. A lot of these guys were married too and had children. Some even had grandchildren. And so telling them about those things, everything that had happened in that 22-year period, that was lost. That would have been a day for them to remember, wouldn't it? So question number 12, what does Pharaoh do whenever he learns that Joseph's family has come to Egypt?
They're happy.
Yeah, Pharaoh was pleased, wasn't there? There was true joy for Joseph in the fact that he had found his family. I don't know if Pharaoh knew all about this story or not, but it kind of indicates to me that he knew something about him being separated from his family. And the fact that he'd been reunited with them, that brought Pharaoh some joy. And what happens shows us how grateful Pharaoh was for Joseph and for what he'd done for him. And like I said before, when we studied, he basically saved the nation of Egypt. They were a world power at this time. If they hadn't been prepared for that 7 years of famine, they would have been wiped off the map. And so he basically preserved them as a world power. He obviously exalted Pharaoh in the eyes of the people. So he really appreciates, what Joseph has done. And he had this marvelous plan, put together to prepare. They're well prepared for the years that lay ahead of this famine. But he told Joseph to bring back his father, bring back their family. He'd give them the best land to live on. He'd give them the best that Egypt had to offer. And basically he said, don't worry about your personal items or your belongings. We'll give you something better. Okay? There would have been some things, animals of value. Animals would have been brought. There's always sentimentals, right? There's always certain things that you just can't replace. But, can you imagine moving? I told you before, I never want to move. But if I did, that'd be the way to do it right there. Everybody, he says, just leave all your stuff behind and you go get something way better than what you got. But that was motivation, wasn't it? That was motivation to help Jacob and the family go down there into Egypt. He even set carts and wagons, for anything that they needed, any supplies or anything that they wanted to bring or even to ride in. Question 13 here, what did Joseph give to all his brothers?
Quite a bit of money.
Yeah. He gave them a lot, didn't he? When you read what they brought back. But particularly what's mentioned there is the clothing. Gave them all a change of clothing. Again, this is one of those things where I think about a change of clothes. That's no big deal because, we got 50 of them in our wardrobe. Well, we get up and we say, well, what pants do I want to wear today? What kind of shirt do I want to wear? Clothing was a valuable commodity in that day and age. Not like you had 10 pairs and you got up every day and you decided what you were going to wear and what you didn't. You basically had one set of clothes. And if you had more than one, you were considered a pretty wealthy individual. And so he gives them all a change of clothing, very valuable, probably fine clothing, I would say, too, probably royal clothing, something to represent rejoicing or happiness. But what does he give to Benjamin? Yeah, gives him 5 changes of clothes and 300 pieces of silver. Right? Why do you think Joseph did that?
Because he was a true brother.
Yeah, it was his own flesh and blood, right? And I think at this point, Joseph has learned, does he have to worry about anybody else being jealous? Remember the meal they ate? Benjamin got 5 times as much as anybody else. Nobody said anything, did they? They weren't resentful. that they were happy that everybody got something. And, you think about Joseph, he didn't have to give them anything, did he? But anything that he did give them was just icing on the cake. And I think he did it for Benjamin again because he was his blood brother. There was a relationship there between him and Benjamin that wasn't there with the rest of his brothers. Didn't mean he didn't love him. Didn't mean he didn't care for him. Just mean that he had a special relationship with Benjamin. What did Joseph send to his father? Question 14.
The donkey was loaded down.
Yeah, he sent 10 female donkeys, right? Well, 10 male donkeys, I think, is the first one. They were loaded with all the best things that Egypt had to offer. And then he sent 10 female donkeys, and they were loaded with grain and bread and a lot of different kinds of food or provisions. What was this food for? Trip back, right? Why'd they need so much?
Bring everybody.
Very lot of people.
You remember how many people come down with him into Egypt? This is kind of fast forward here.
70.
Yeah, about 70. So you think about 70 people traveling for 3 months, how much food, and then you got animals on top of that, how much food do you think you're gonna need? I've seen our fellowship meals back there in the back, right? You're gonna need a bunch of it. You're gonna take a bunch. And, I don't know how many meals they ate a day, but you're gonna take a bunch of food. But Joseph sent everything that was necessary. Sent everything that was necessary for them to make that trip back. Do the last one here, 15. How does Jacob react to the shocking news that Joseph was alive and well?
Didn't believe it until he saw all the stuff.
Yeah, he literally in the Hebrew almost had a heart attack. You ever had your heart fluttered before? That's what the Hebrew is talking about here. His heart skipped a beat, or his heart fluttered, and the news was just too good to be true. And at first he didn't believe it, couldn't believe it. But when you see all these animals, you see all these wagons, you see all this food and all these gifts from Egypt, I mean, how else you go explain all these things? Simeon's come back, Benjamin has come back. It's got to be true. And the Bible says that his spirit was renewed within him whenever he contemplated the thought of having his whole family together again. That's something as I get older, I think about those times in the past when all of our family was together. And people aren't here today. You can't do that anymore. But what would you give to go back in time and be able to do that? I mean, that was just an overwhelming thought for Jacob. And here's his only thing that he says is what?
Don't hesitate, no.
He says, yay, we're saved from the famine, right? The only thing he was thinking about was, I get to see Joseph. I get to see my son again.
Before he dies.
Yeah. All right. Anybody have any thoughts or comments there? Genesis 45?